Okay, I'm going to kick off just as the last of you are settling down. Welcome back after your coffee break. My name is Peter Ferry. You heard me referred to by Bill and Colin earlier on today. I am the Chief Executive of the Digital Trust Centre of Excellence, which we have just founded here in Napier University. Digital Trust is about our confidence that our interests are protected in the digital world today. We're going to hear a lot about the challenges that digital trust can address around trustworthy data, around the protection of your privacy, about how it can deliver more efficient transactions over the next two panels. The first one, which is led by yours truly, and I'll introduce our panelists in just a moment. And the second, which will focus on digital trust in financial services, which will be led by Stephen Ingledew, who I'll reintroduce just when his panel kicks off in about 45 minutes. So the Digital Trust Centre of Excellence is all about taking innovation, about taking some of the applied research that we see in three of the leading universities in this area in Scotland and mixing that with industry-led challenges to drive new innovation calls, which can bring in some of those innovative companies and spin out some of the best in research and to create a thriving digital trust ecosystem here in Scotland, and hopefully contribute to some of that economic growth, which Colin Cook talked about in his address. So in the first of these panels, we're going to talk about the digital trust technologies and blockchain in business and society, and in the second of the panels, specifically around some of the challenges and opportunities in financial services. So I'll first of all introduce my panel, who are confusingly named because we'll have three Martins on the panel. So a round of applause for that. So to my left and closest to me is Mr. Martin Doherty Hughes, a former MP and a leader of the blockchain all-party parliamentary group in Westminster. He's now taken a rest from that after 30 years in public life, Martin. Good grief. But he's still very active in public policy. We have at the other end Martin Halford. Martin is CTO of blockchain data sharing company SICCAR, company which I have also been involved in my past. And he's also a contributor to various open source blockchain software projects, and we'll probably talk a little bit about that when we move on. We also have Martin Trotter, Martin 3, who is the Regtech lead in Grant Thornton. And Grant Thornton are in the process of preparing a report, not quite published yet, I think, which was facilitated by Scottish Enterprise around about the use of DLT in Regtech technologies. And then finally, disappointingly named Chris. Otherwise, we would have had the full set. Chris Tate is CEO of Condatis. I'm sure a company known to many of you in the field, but has a longer background as an innovator in, I suppose, what you would call applied photonics. And when I read your bio, quite an interesting CV you've got, quite an interesting background, Chris. And he is a leading proponent of digital ID and decentralized ID in this field. So a quick round of applause for your panel, please. So I take a seat next to you, and I'll just remind you, gentlemen, you might want to switch your microphones on at this point. So the first thing I'd like to examine is in digital trust, and specifically around the blockchain technologies. I've worked in this field for probably around about a decade. I want to turn to you, Martin D, first of all, really around where do we see the impact of digital trust technologies in the fields that you're familiar with, particularly in, given your background in Westminster, in the AppG, where do you see the greatest examples of trust technology that have been deployed today?
Well, it's great to be here, Peter, and thanks to you and to Bill for the invite. May I just say, I'm former MP and former chair of the All-Party Group in blockchain, as well as Estonia. I'll be a bit of a geek on Estonia. That's not a surprise to me. It's always the private sector and business where there's innovation, where there's opportunity to come forward and to grow. Given though my background, I was always very concerned of the lack of innovation or delivery using, I'll say DLT now, because I think blockchain sometimes, especially in the public sector, scares people away. Kind of challenge, I maybe a question earlier in the earlier session was about, these are the kind of areas where there's existing growth, etc., but the public sector, specifically in Scotland, has an opportunity to lead. Because I often believe that if the government's not leading through delivery of public service, then it's slowing everything else down. And if they're delivering in the field, that shows that they get what you're trying to achieve in the private sphere or anything that's not in the public sphere. So whilst there are areas of growth, the one I'm really interested in is how do we make DLT work for the citizen at the front line of public service delivery. And in that, there's a hell of a lot of the private sector as well.
What do you think the examples are of that? When you look internationally, where do you see
well, why shouldn't, to me, it's always going to be Estonia. And of course, Estonia is in many ways, its tech is maybe, as you keep reminding me, about 20 years out of date now in that sense. So it's, in terms of the technology, it might be behind, but in terms of their thinking and their delivery, it's still forward thinking. And where that comes in, I think in recent months has been the Estonian government was very clear that unlike here in the UK, not just in Scotland, where the media is very much, we should ban children from having iPads, laptops, and iPhones or whatever in the classroom, investing in them so these kids, so they know how to use the apparatus, but more importantly, how to engage, for example, with AI, with DLT, invest in them as, critical thinkers of the technology, as Federico was saying earlier. And I think we're really missing that debate about how we critically think and support and create that resilience in the generation behind us, if not also ourselves and the generation which are in front of us. Because if we don't, we're going to fail the economy.
Turning to Martin Halford now. Martin, you've been pretty active in business ecosystems around the use of blockchain in your work with SICCAR. What examples would you point to, particularly in the non-finance industries, manufacturing, energy, environment, of where this technology's had an impact?
Awesome. Yeah. So at SICCAR, we're a data sharing platform primarily. And the sweet spot for this platform is consortiums of companies sharing data between themselves. So the sort of industries like supply chain, ESG, energy, financial services, anywhere where people need to share data between companies, that's where we see a real, opportunity. The main issue here we have is the companies themselves. They're very reticent to let data go outside of their own silo. When I say that they're reticent to do it in a controlled manner or a way that they could trust data to other people, other companies. What they tend to do, it tends to get emailed around or Excel spreadsheets get handed around. So there's a massive opportunity here to provide a decentralized single source of truth whereby companies can share data in a controlled way, where you have proper governance. And this is going to become more important as regulations start to take hold. And there are real downsides to having the wrong data, reporting the wrong data, or allowing data to get out of your control, with GDPR regulations, that kind of stuff. So that's the kind of gist of what we're doing.
Very much, Martin. And I guess, Chris, you've been a big proponent of driving the use of digital identity in business, and I guess also in public services. I mean, could you just frame that digital identity challenges as you see it, and give the audience a view of the value of the decentralized approaches in digital identity.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So if you don't know who Condatis is, yeah, relatively small compared to the might have had Quorum Cybers going on, but also an Edinburgh-based company. We specialize in Microsoft and we deliver solutions in what we call identity and access management. We've been working in decentralized identity now for about 8 or 9 years. Initially doing a big project in Australia with MasterCard, a big payment provider. And the whole provision there is to think of identities being something that an individual can hold. We all have a wallet or a purse. And these days, a lot of transactions we rely on through either Google Pay or Apple Pay. And we entrust our digital identity to Facebook or Google or Apple. Why do you do that? So what we've been looking to do, just full disclosure, we are a Microsoft implementation house, but we are one of the global leading Microsoft implementation houses. I say that advisedly. So when Microsoft launched their decentralized identity platform called Enter Verified ID, we were one of only 3 companies globally that they first entrusted to do that. So we've rolled that out. The first implementation of that was with NHS England, where for them, they were looking to say, well, how do we use an NHS employee credential to move between trusts? You may know the NHS very well, but actually it's not one organization, not even NHS England, NHS Scotland. In England, there are 220 trusts. And if you want to move between a trust, it used to take about 2 weeks. So we designed a platform called the Digital Staff Passport using decentralized identity. You hold and authenticate a credential in a wallet, not on Apple or a Facebook wallet. In this case, it was authenticated by Microsoft platform, but it wasn't held by Microsoft. It's on your device and it cryptographically checks that. Now, listening to Colin earlier on, UK PLC needs to be more efficient. Scotland needs to be more efficient. We moved the time to move between a trust for a clinician from 2 weeks to 27 minutes. We're doing that, and we actually use that same platform for accessing our office every day. So I know people don't want to get their phones out because we don't want to be going online, but just humor me for like 30 seconds, if that's okay. Who has Authenticator on their phone? Yeah, okay. Let's just open it up now. Let's do something live. Okay. So if you open it up, hopefully they'll use some biometrics to open it for you. Okay. So hopefully Face ID or a finger check. Okay. And you will hopefully use passkeys or addresses or something. On the bottom right, have a look and you'll see a thing called verified IDs. Now, I reckon I'm probably the only person in this room who uses that. Okay? But on mine, I've got credentials, some issued by Microsoft, some issued by Condatis, and I can access my Condatis credential that shows who I am. I'm the CEO of the company, has a certain time window. It also has when it was last used. It has some cryptographic information about it. But this is my credential I hold, not held by Microsoft, and I can use it. Wouldn't it be great if when my daughter, who's a teenager or a young woman now, when she goes to a nightclub, she doesn't have to show her driving license. You can use her digital credential. So yeah, I'm all about evangelizing the use of you holding your data for yourself.
Thanks very much, Chris. There's a lot about convenience there and how you get to be a citizen within the digital infrastructure of a country. But changing tack a little, just turn to you, Martin T. I guess in the 2 speakers this morning, there was a discussion around the role of trustworthy data in driving ethical AI, and in Grant Thornton, I know that you've formed a view, because I did read that preview of the report, that technology can really transform the regulatory landscape. So just what are your views in that around how DLT can impact upon governance and risk and compliance?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of opportunities there for people that don't know the financial service world and other regulated sectors. Is data is a massive challenge for all of them, their data quality, their governance, etc. So when it comes to things of transaction monitoring, regulatory reporting, which can apply to multiple different industries, they struggle with this. So, they have to go through these exercises where people are spending weeks and weeks verifying data, getting it from sheets. Everybody loves a spreadsheet. Why have it in one source? And it was really good to hear Martin say there that around the single source of truth. That word gets used, or that phrase, sorry, gets used so much around data, with reporting, etc. And within organisations, I'm pretty sure you could go to any organisation and say, where's your single source of truth for data? And they would really struggle with that. So with DLT, I believe that, you know, that can be used to, you know, create that one piece of data, contract it out to different areas who use it, who to consume it, etc. And look at using that in a different way, rather than you have this raw curated analytical layers. People use it in different ways. They take in a spreadsheet to change it, and then be able to then drive compliance off the back of that, where that data, where that information doesn't align with your risk framework, etc.
Thanks very much. And that report, I think, will be issued in the next couple of months, so we should all look out for that.
I'm not sure where Sarah is, but yeah, maybe a wee bit longer than that.
Okay.
But we'll keep these updated in that progress.
Yeah, we'll look forward to that. And back to you. Unlike the rest of us who just have to listen in on politics and so on, you've been close to the white heat of democracy.
Is that what they call it?
Yeah. And I'm curious about how, you know, if unreliable data has perhaps affected that path of democracy in the past. How do you see digital trust technologies being bridged in the future to address some of those problems that we've seen?
I think it's essential. I mean, I thought it was interesting when Federico was on earlier, talked about rather than coding, we should be teaching ourselves, you know, kind of ethical approaches. And I think it's essential for politicians today as well. I was the first politician in the UK Parliament ever to lead a debate on crypto assets and regulation, requirement for regulation, which fed into the financial regulation bill. I sat in that bill committee. That kind of questions, I think the answer to that is it's essential that we recognise why trust is important for democracy. And that's as someone who believes that the delivery of public services, if they fail for a range of reasons, they can undermine our system of government. You see that in different types of political regimes, whether it be what we call, for the very simple purposes, democracy, what I call a polyarchy, or for example, if it's a one-party state like the former Soviet Union or communist China, there has got to be trust in the system and delivery of government. I mean, that starts to fall apart, you then have an undermining of that principle of government, whatever it happens to be. And I do think that we are at a crux in democratic or traditional so-called Western democratic government, where the failure of trust is becoming systemic because there's a failure to deliver on the ground. Now, forgive me for saying, but it's really great to be talking about a range of issues today. How do we support economic growth at the top end of industry or in fintech and financial services, especially for a city like Edinburgh and for Scotland and for the whole of the UK, it's very important. But where does the technology then impact democracy at the ground level in the delivery of very simple and basic public services? So if it takes me, and forgive me for giving an example, if I want to look at my public health record, anyone here live in Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board? Or are we all, there's 1, 2, 3. Okay, everybody else, maybe is in the east, you're in Lothian. For those of us in Greater Glasgow and Clyde, it takes us, if we request via an online portal, in email or by letter, you won't get a response for a month as to how you access your public health records. You then need to go and, given a pen and paper, you're not allowed any mobile technology, and take notes of your own medical records. That's insane in the 21st century. Absolute bonkers. It's my information, and I can accept some of that might not be right for me to see, given clinical decisions, etc. But if you're in Estonia, jump onto my online national system, and there's all my medical records. There's my police record if it exists. There's absolutely everything the government holds about. And I think that example is a way in which we can transform our trust in our own system of government. Not necessarily the people you elect, that ain't going to change, but the system of government that we're supposed to support. And without it, I think in the kind of medium to long term, we're in trouble.
In terms of privacy and consent around how information is managed, it's something which we'll certainly be looking at in the Centre of Excellence. Martin, Halford, I see you have the microphone in your hand. So I guess kind of challenging set of questions, really. Colin earlier on talked about bill going through the Scottish Parliament around legal equivalence between digital assets and property. You talked to me though about about legally enforceable smart contracts and you know, and the use in commercial agreements. And although we didn't get the chance to talk about the challenges of the last mile, I wanted to kind of just give you a couple of minutes to expound on those themes.
Okay. So this is a topic I feel particularly passionate about. I think in order for blockchain technology to really take off, it needs to be adopted by the mainstream. And in order for that to happen, you need to have legal enforceability of what happens on chain with the real world. Right? If I tokenize my house or my car and put it on the chain and people buy those tokens, what's to stop me from selling that house or that car and just rug pulling the people on chain? Right? At the moment, nothing. And so one of the areas that I think we need to grow in is actually having it so that we can fix that last mile. So the last mile is, how do you legally attach digital assets with real world assets? How do you legally attach, you know, data that's online with whatever it represents offline? Okay. And so one of the projects I've been involved with for the last few years is the Accord project. The Accord project is about smart legal contracts. And fun fact, although you've never heard of the Accord project, I can almost guarantee every one of you, not everyone, a lot of you have used it. Anyone who has signed a DocuSign agreement is using the Accord project underneath the hood. Right? And so the mission of the Accord project is to be able to get blockchain to have legally enforceable connection to the real world. I think it's kind of fundamental. It's about being regulatory friendly. So blockchains are actually, you know, you need to have the identity, digital identity in there so people know who you're talking to. There's no point transacting with anonymous people. You need to have the KYC, AML stuff in there to make sure that no fraud's happening. And once the technology can embrace that kind of architecture, I think then it's open for the mainstream.
Quicker than 2 minutes. So I want to talk now to, I guess, for those of us who've worked in this field, particularly in the blockchain area, there's often frustration around how adoption and how quickly business world, public sector can be to adopt some of those technologies. So I want to talk about stakeholders' roles in building this digital trust infrastructure of the future. So, Chris, you talked about digital identity, and I guess that governments have a particular role in providing that identity substrate that business and society is dependent on. I guess we can only, US companies seem to be more successful at rolling out that kind of infrastructure than perhaps European governments. Now we're seeing a lot happening in the European community around the EU digital identity wallet, and some moves now in the UK around the bill that's just received royal assent. So could you tell us, could you boil down, you know, what do you see the opportunities for us in Scotland and the risks of not being able to respond to those opportunities?
Okay, that's a question.
Yeah.
So I guess firstly, obviously Scotland and the UK is still within mainland Europe. We're no longer part of the European Union. A number of years ago, a decision was taken that European citizens in the EU would be able to have an identity system, so it's called eIDAS, and there are a lot of provisions being put in place that by July of next year, every European citizen will be able to have their credential for themselves in their country, and they will have ownership of it, much as Martin mentioned about Estonia, which is fantastic. The UK has a serious risk of falling behind, fundamentally, because although we're trying to emulate it through the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, it's just trying to mirror it. I work in a business, but I guess the same for whether it's a business or public sector, we are going to need to interact with the 350 million people who are in the European Union, be it importing and exporting, but also if you think of, we do a very big project in travel and hospitality. There's a very large holiday company with doing an update. But fundamentally, Scotland is a fantastic location for people to come to, and they're going to want to rock up with a European identity and say, well, I want to check into a hotel. I want to access the Edinburgh Festival. I want to go to amazing places. If we say, oh, no, sorry, you have to have your everything in paper. It's like, I'm amazed still when I go to a hotel, I have to give my passport sometimes until the next morning. I'm like, oh, so fundamentally, Scottish businesses, UK PLC needs to be mindful of how they're going to be able to interact with that European wallet. And also, fundamentally, can we add services on top of that? So a classic one in travel, those of you who are unfortunate having to do a lot of business travel, when you arrive in a hotel, what services are you going to interact with? You probably, if you've had a long flight, you want to go down to the bar. I mean, I'm not encouraging alcohol, but you might want to have a drink. Okay, fine. What about the next day? Do you want to go and interact with those services? If you have an opportunity to think about what I'll say profile and preferences, could you create a digital credential of yourself that says, I'm vegetarian, I'm a non-smoker, I like a room on the first floor because I'm not a hobbit, and I like to go diving. So, well, great. When you land and you go into your hotel, suddenly those services are provided for you. It's on how much credential you want to share. If you don't want to share that, that's up to you, because again, it's your credential in your wallet. There are a whole myriad of business opportunities that Scottish businesses can think about leveraging by considering that identity can become an enabler for the interactions in the UK, in the EU, and in time, we're already seeing in America with digital driving licenses in Colorado and California, there is going to be a push to becoming more and more digitally credentialized.
Is there a sort of random question? Is there a danger that if we fail to react to what's happening in Europe, in Scotland, that we may be left behind?
Yes, absolutely. What I would say, though, is that we don't always have to invent everything from the ground up. A phrase I'm going to plagiarize from somebody else is standing on the shoulders of giants. Okay, so there are a whole bunch of amazing tech stacks out there. Yes, a lot of them are based in California or in Seattle, but why can't companies build upon that? I mean, Ferry's got a £250 million business implementing Sentinel and Defender, which is a Microsoft platform. We don't have to badmouth Microsoft. Pretty much everybody will have a Microsoft footprint. So can we build services on top of that? There's a huge amount of what I call white label technology, but we can build on that technology, whether it's in Scottish government or Scottish businesses, and maximize and differentiate our services, but using a ground platform.
Chris, and the question to Martin Trotter, just what do you think what role can the regulators have in supporting this digital infrastructure of the future?
Yeah, I think the regulators are starting to become more tech positive. So we can see that from the FCA. They've went from a tech neutral stance to tech positive over the last couple of years, which is quite good to see. And I think Bill spoke about it in the sense of lots of different sandboxes, access to various types of data, because I think that's what companies struggle with, in the sense of they've got a really good idea, they've got a really good product, but to put it through these real life data scenarios, and that'll always be a challenge. I think in the terms of, from a regulatory point of view, I think they need to bring people together. It's the biggest challenge in sharing those real life use cases. I can't remember who said it earlier, but focusing on outcomes for regulations and for products, etc. That's what, from whether it's the end customer, a business, everybody in this room understands, is where are the outcomes now. From an FCA point of view, they've started to look at outcomes in the terms of their regulations. If anyone's heard of consumer duty, they focus on outcomes now, and it's a key buzzword. I think regulators need to work more together. Like we're talking about, it seems that everything is done in isolation. So the energy, health, financial, they'll all come up with their own regulations. They'll all do it. Why are we not working closer together to really see where technology can be leveraged across multiple regulations to allow a better societal outcome for this technology that keeps everyone safe, better standard of living, etc., etc.
It can often seem that in the delivery of public services, the public sector is more impacted by some of the regulations that slow them down than perhaps the tech titans have been in some of these services. I'll turn to you now, Martin, actually, because you're looking at me. Look in your face there. I'll tell you about a book I read recently. I read London Spy, Ezra Klein and his mate. Have you come across that? That's a great read. But one of the things it talked about was the delivery of infrastructure being very slow in the UK and the US, amongst the most expensive in the world. And you know, we've talked about the delivery of digital infrastructure and why that's delivered slowly. I mean, what systems change do you think is required to speed up the delivery of that trusted digital infrastructure?
How long have you got?
Here's your revolutionary manifesto opportunity. On you go.
Well, when it comes to public procurement, I mean, first of all, I mean, I do think there are some good examples. I think Forth Road Bridge, sorry, was a really good example. It was ahead of time. It was under budget. I mean, there are good examples across not just Scotland, but the whole of the UK. If there was something in terms of public delivery of big infrastructures, especially here across the whole of the UK, not just Scotland, is stop being afraid. To senior civil servants and the bureaucracy of government, if you don't know the answer, get people around you who do. And I think what we're seeing over the last number of years, and I'm not going to apologise for the question I asked, Colin, I think it's a very important question around the delivery of the NHS Scotland app, is that why has that taken 4 years to get to the position where we only have one local authority area covered, sorry, one health board area covered? I think it's Lanarkshire, and it's only very specific small elements when it should have been getting rolled out across the whole country. Mistakes are a part of, I think we were hearing earlier again from Fernando, and it was Bill had mentioned as well, about learning. We need to be open about the mistakes we make and learn from them and get the people around us who can teach us to try and not make them again. And I think, I'm not going to speak to the United States. There's a whole raft of issues in the United States about their philosophical approach to public procurement and public infrastructure, which we, you know, luckily, at least in some part, we don't have here in the UK, Scotland. But there needs to be stop being afraid of making those mistakes. And once you make them, don't be afraid to ask for help. And if you feel as though you don't have the information, is there somebody else who can do it? That's as simple as, I'm starting to sound like Dominic Cummings. I really need to stop now. And I'll hand the microphone to somebody else.
Last person I thought would sound like Dominic Cummings. Martin Halford, with your view of blockchain projects in the industries that we talk about, there's more pilots than production over the past decade. Why is that, and what can we now do looking forward to help form the sorts of industry consortium that can drive forward digital trust projects?
That's a great question. The execution gap, getting from pilot to production. Where to begin? There's a few different things that are going on here. One is that a lot of the pilot projects that companies start, they start from scratch. Everyone is reinventing the same wheel. And you know, in terms of DLTs, that's a common problem. People will take some protocol and start to fork it and do what they want to do with it, right? I think there's a real opening here to create standards. Like, here are some best practice ways to do the sort of things we need to do, like identity, you know, like KYC, AML, you know, that kind of stuff, you know, encryption, that kind of stuff, secure storing of data. And here are some reference implementations, so that people can take the standing on giants approach and say, well, here's something that's been scrutinized, and we can use this now to build our idea. Because the idea is the important part, right? Not the actual, you know, foundations, right? So I think there's a real opportunity there to build some reference implementations that have, you know, the community come together and actually build some of these things together and go, this is what we think would be a good idea. People don't have to use it, but at least they know that it actually can, it would be a better chance of actually being accepted by industry, because the industry, they're about trust, not just trust in technology, but trust in the actual companies delivering this stuff. Like, will this actually work? Am I going to place a bet on this? Because there are some quite large cultural shifts happening here. And I think I forgot the rest of the question.
Martin. Now, one of my jobs today is to make sure speak to time, steal an extra few minutes in my 45 minutes just by asking one final question. My final thought is, you know, if you were God, or maybe not God, if you were Jesus, You could make one thing so. What's the single biggest thing you think to have an economic impact, that level of impact that was talked about in the talk this morning, around digital trust? If there's one thing you could change or project that you could execute to drive that forward and really see the impact from society, what would that thing be? And I would ask each of you in turn. Yeah. Martin's going to get the longest to think about it. I'm going to turn to you first, Martin.
That's simple. It needs to be a national digital ID. You're giving our identity away every second. We're on our mobile phones, our laptops. Every second of the day, our ID has been taken, not used for us in any shape or form. We need to get over the ID that government has, squirreled away all our information. They have our national insurance number. In Scotland, we have our community health index / NHS number. You have all these government numbers, your HMR, they are used to lock us out of our own information. And if you use at least one of them to open up that in a formal, processed way, of course, that information would be groundbreaking, not just for Scotland, but the whole of how the UK and Northern Ireland looks at our own personal information. It's our info. I want access to my identity, whether it's in the real world or in the digital world. I think that's the easy answer to that.
Just before we let you relinquish that, Mike. So we've been kind of trying to do that in the past. How would we make that happen? What would be the big lever that could be pulled?
Really happen now? The simple, straightforward way the Estonians did was that they made sure they digitized their treasury, and therefore every other department in government recognized that the digital approach of the treasury in Estonia was the way in which they then wanted to deliver a public service. So the health system followed on, planning followed after that, and within a very short period of time, the entire system of public service delivery in Estonia can be accessed online. Still the traditional way for those who want to do so, but still then delivered 90% of it delivered digitally to citizens and access to your own information. Seems like a winner to me.
Thanos, like you can snap your fingers and make that
happen. Yeah.
Chris, I hope Martin hasn't stolen your identity thunder there. What would you do?
What he said. Genuinely, what Martin just said, but I think just another permutation on top of that. People look at trust and digital trust as a sort of almost a barrier. I read a report by somebody I really respect last week saying about identity is the next digital cybersecurity perimeter. It's like, no, it's not. If you think about security being a perimeter, then it's another thing that a hacker is going to get across, or actually an identity just login. I absolutely agree with the consideration of an individual citizen's identity, but also the provision of that being something that the individual holds. And you do not create a data store that the government holds that then becomes an attack surface and a threat vector. What you do is you decentralize that identity, you give the provision and access to that to the individual, and you create what I call a zero trust protocol around that. So you verify explicitly, least privileged, assume breach, and as a result, your accessing of the data is only to your piece of the data with a cryptographic handshake. Don't suddenly think that UK government with one of the big four consultancy firms is going to build something which is safe for you. So you guarantee there's somebody smarter elsewhere who'll then find the keys to the kingdom, and that data will be lost. Decentralize it, empower it with the individual, but it's your data. We look at GDPR, I can get all the other records I should be able to. Why should we have the government creating some sort of barrier we then sort of rely on and trust? So what he says and a little bit more.
Martin, quickly for you.
Yeah, I think I'm not really sure what I would change exactly in the terms of the technology or adoption part of it, but I think there's an education piece. You can have the best solution in the world, you can have the best ideas in it, but if nobody understands it or accepts it, it's just not going to happen. And I think that's where, from a societal point of view, that there's this education around how this can help you. And, people will get there and it takes time. But the easiest way with most people is to put the value on it. So, if we have a centralized ID, how much money is that saving you in the terms of your tax you pay from a government department, whatever it may be? people will always understand that. Is it making more money or is it saving money? And I think putting that spin on it around there, there'll always be trust issues with government and ID and access, etc. Especially in today, you know, does anyone really trust the government with their information, etc.? Probably not. But if we can use that education to show how these technologies remove that empowerment away from the government and give it to you, I think that's one of the key ways to get that adopted.
Excellent notion. We shall make it so. Martin, Halford, to finish it.
Okay, I feel like my thunder's been stolen quite dramatically, but that's okay. The only thing I'd add to this is that we live in an age of data pollution. And what I mean by that is that, you know, the single sources of truth are often behind government firewalls and in vaults somewhere. And so people end up copying it and sending it and moving it around, that kind of stuff, right? So if there's anything we could fix, wave the magic hot wand, would be to enable the those sources of truth to be more accessible digitally. So we actually can access the data, reduce the single sources of truth to fewer ones. So we don't have the health board issues where you've got multiple databases around the place, and then allows you to then tie an identity and make it more efficient to do things. So, yeah.
Excellent. Right. Well, with that, our panel will be appearing in the Edinburgh Fringe as Chris and the Three Martins in August. I'd like just to thank them in the usual way. Thank you.